liked to do when you were a youth. So I'll start. Like I said, my name is Kelly. I work with the Department of Ed, but the thing that actually brings me to this line of work is my children. So I'm a mom, first and foremost. And the thing that I enjoyed most when I was a youth was participating in our community theater group.
And I'm Helene. What brings me to this work is my former career as a special ed teacher in Massachusetts first, and then for more years than I care to mention here in New Hampshire. I was also a special ed director, so worked a lot with children who struggled with learning and behavior. And then when you become a director, you get into the paperwork and the legal requirements, and that was getting kind of boring and tired for me. So I wanted to do something that was going to make a difference with children and youth again. So I felt through training people who work with children and youth, that might fulfill that in me as well. And when I was a youth, I lived in one of those neighborhoods where we left the house in the morning, we played in the neighborhood, rode bikes, imagined things all day, didn't come home till the dinner bell rang, went out again till dark, the dinner bell rang. And so just being able to be free and safe and playing with the people in my neighborhood was great, and I was also an avid reader.
I'm Bob Shulman, I'm a Rotarian, and
Everything that we deliver is based on some really core guiding principles. This graphic is on the back side of that wellness flyer, if you want to look at it in a little more detail. At the bottom of our tree, in these dark circles, these are our guiding principles. And I challenge you to think a little bit about the guiding principles of bestcamp. How is it that you structure what you do? What are the values and principles that guide you? I suspect they're very similar to what guide us. First and foremost, everything that we do is family-driven and youth-guided. The child at the center. The most important thing about our work is how it impacts the child. Secondarily, how it impacts the family. We also want to make sure that everything that we do is culturally competent. And what we mean by that is respectful of the individual. So their background, how they see the world, sort of how they're coming into the work. Again, this is a little wonky. It makes a lot more sense in the school setting, but I just want to give you a little bit of background as far as where I'm coming from and where this work comes from. Something that will apply, I think, to bestcamp is the secondary part of how we encourage folks to implement their work. This is called a multi-tiered system. Again, a wonky term, but sort of in general, what it means is we think about what we're doing for all kids. How are we structuring best camp for every camper? We're thinking about what we're doing for those students who have a slightly elevated level of need, or they need maybe some additional supports or some additional guidance during the day. And then what are we doing for those kids who are really, really high need and really need some support and really need some intensive attention to help get them successfully throughout the day? Any thoughts on this? Again, this is all wonky. It'll start to come into context as we talk about more of the content. One question. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think if you look at the intensive, the top two, perhaps identifying, we've seen different behaviors, what can we be doing early on that quickly lets the student know, we pay attention to them, but this behavior is not acceptable.
Yeah.
That, I think, would be very helpful.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, probably everyone who's worked at bestcamp can, in your head, identify certain students who are in one of those two parts. And so when you're doing your activity toward the end, be thinking of those kinds of behaviors. And I will go over some of what's in your folder about how that can be used like for this whole group. Or if you see this child with these behaviors, there are some frameworks that you can use to have some discussions about some of those really specific behaviors and what maybe you can do within that. So we'll do a little more of that.
Let's it seems to me that as a group, we all fall into tier one.
Yes.
Yeah,
I certainly don't feel qualified, even though I've been a teacher and a parent, to even begin to approach any activities or interventions of tier two, and certainly not tier three. To me, tier three is the requirement for professional intervention and not a bunch of volunteers.
Sure.
So, I don't think we as a club or the camp has any facility to address tier two or three.
You may not.
So, you
And a
know,
lot of times this work looks like identifying when we should provide additional resources.
okay,
to
so
a
we
student or-
identify the need for additional resources, it stops there.
It could,
Well,
yeah.
it does. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
telling
for,
you,
for your job. as
no,
a
for the
volunteer.
camp, I'm not
Okay.
talking about, I'm talking about the
Okay.
camp.
Mhm.
Can't address tier two or three at this stage.
Sure.
Okay,
So,
that,
we're
again,
dead in
like,
the water.
like I said though, that means maybe that's a discussion that, if these two are some areas of need, that maybe that part gets discussed, and maybe, is there a resource through some community center or through schools or something that might be available to the youth who are having those more intensive problems?
And I would think by the end of today, or at least my hope is that once we kind of all dive into everything you're sharing with us, we can go back to Jed's question, which really builds up to yours, which is,
Absolutely.
what do we do when we realize if we're prepared for tier one, and we have a student who's displaying behaviors that need tier two,
Yes,
who do we go to?
right.
And I think for all of us to know where those lines are, what those expectations are, because we can't, like, even if we were all trained to do tier two, we still need a lot of folks to do tier one.
Correct.
You know, and so I think figuring out those expectations, that's what I'm excited to hear about what you're,
And
gonna help us
seriously,
with.
this model was brought about, as Kelly said, for schools, because schools were finding themselves in that same situation with all the resources that schools have, even for the top of the pyramid. Schools are not mental health clinicians.
Right.
So there need to be those partnerships and relationships through the community with those people.
yeah.
So even if, there's little other than that you're recognizing that, then that gives you folks a place to start about what supports may be available and what can we do, possibly outside of the camp day, even just a referral or something to get that someone to do something, but who would be that person? And we do other trainings, which we'll talk about at the end too, that help to recognize more and more of those signs.
If I may, some of the kids at the top, we our whole month of July pretty much.
Yeah.
These two sentences. And reached the point now that we know, maybe this kid was there last year, but in the first week, it's obvious to a lot of us that this kid needs a one-on-one thing, and we're not enough of us to handle all that. We've got
Right.
90 kids and whatever number of us.
Right.
Because some of them are so disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
We can maybe get their attention and cool them down for 10 minutes,
Right.
but we've got a whole month to do.
Yep.
And are we up against something that's really beyond Camp Best? We certainly are with a few of the kids that obviously need somebody to hold their hand all the way through the rest of school.
I'm a new volunteer, and I guess what I don't understand or what I don't know at this point is more about the demographics of these kids.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they here? Do they all want to be here? Are they forced to be here? What is actually the situation that brings them to camp and wants them or doesn't want them to
Right.
stay in camp?
Right.
I can address that a little bit. So the students that are selected to come to camp, there's a process that we work with the school district, with teachers, to identify kids that would most benefit from this. And there can be an array of reasons why a child might be selected. Maybe they're behind academically in school and they need to avoid the kind of the summer slide, to, fall further back than we just to kind of catch up, if you will. It could be maybe behavioral problems. Maybe they have a hard time in the classroom, they're disruptive, they're getting in trouble. Maybe this would be a good environment that we do outdoor activities, less academics. It could be that, their economic status. Maybe their parents don't have any means of doing anything this summer. They'd be sitting in front of a television the whole summer, inside, not being exposed to different activities. Could be, a bunch of things. A lot of the kids are single parent families, and so they don't have a mentor in their life, a mother figure, a father figure, whatever it may be. So for kind of this whole array of things, teachers select this child may benefit the most from the camp. And so it's not necessarily one reason, but as a whole approach, when the teachers are working on throughout the year, they kind of see a more holistic.
But what you're saying is that it's not the child's choice necessarily to be there.
So they're invited. They do not have to come. It's so that there's an application that's given saying you've been selected. If this is a free camp to you that is generously by people donating and making this possible, and volunteers, everyone here running it, for them to come to. And people typically jump on that as soon as they can, because they may not be able to afford a summer camp, they may not be able to do this. It could be a lot of different reasons why, but it's the overall feeling of the kids that do receive these. They're excited to get that, and they want to be at the camp. It's not something that it's like, ooh, I got selected, please don't make me go, Mom, I really don't want to be there. It's more so, I'm excited to go. Kids create excitement around it. There are a few kids that say, I don't want to be here, my mom's making me be here, but I would say that's less than like 5% of the kids that come there.
And none of the kids are court referred, right? And and this is not summer school, so they're not required from the school that they attend.
We can't reveal that confidential information, you guys and kids. But I'm glad, years ago, the definition of those kids that were selected and invited was very loose. So that's in a positive direction, at least we have a definition of these kids. I'm speaking, I may step into something, but I really don't I feel like the number one goal for Rotarians needs to be the building connections, the mentor connection that you have with kids. And this is that's why it's very good that this is happening, because there needs to be the set of expectations built with the kids so there's buy-in, but also that protocol, that procedure, so then you don't get into something that is really, really challenging and you don't feel frustrated and you don't feel like this is over my head. So this is fantastic that now you're learning that, I really shouldn't be dealing this because I'm not qualified. I mean, I deal with things that I know that I'm not a mental health specialist, that, that's where I have readily available help a lot of the times. So this is, I love the fact that you're building upon this.
Yes, sir.
I think the camp, after all, is for kids with problems. And to me, the real problem is, how do you keep the tier 2, the tier 3 from screwing up the experiences of tier 1?
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of foremost challenge facing anybody who works with kids, right? I didn't say in the introduction that I also am the leader of my daughter's Girl Scout troop. And I, just like you, went through a horrific last year, and this is my work. And I got through the end of last school year with my girls and I said, that is it. I have done enough time on the island of Lord of the Flies. I am ready to go. But I also know how important it is that structure and that opportunity and that positive space remains for those girls that were giving me the hardest challenge. And so, I've challenged myself to think a little differently about my role. It's also important to note that, yes, this is applicable for the emotional wellness dimension, but it's applicable for all of the dimensions, right? So, I mean, in physical, you could apply this to food. I don't know if you provide food during best camp. So you provide lunch for all the campers. Maybe after
Yes.
some
We do.
iteration you say, hey, maybe we'll send home some snacks over the weekend for a few. And maybe there's some where we say, hey, mom, you know, here's a card, go check out you know, I'm referring you to this service, essentially. So the sort of tiered approach to people can apply in any circumstance. These are what might be going wrong, but also what might be going right, what might be typical, what might be experiencing. So for the sake of time today, we're going to edit a few of our activities. This is one of them. And so rather than breaking into groups, I'm going to ask you to share with me some thoughts and ideas about what typical adolescent development looks like.
And
What's typical?
You should be experts because you've all lived through it. And if you recall, it's not a smooth ride that at that time, even just for anybody, any person.
Yeah, so what is normal when you're aged 12 to 18? Yeah.
Well, for the first of that, the desire to fit in.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
Getting reward and punishment.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Having limit.
Having limits.
You did what your parents told you to do.
Or else. That's discipline, I think, is better.
Do you think that was typical? Jed?
No, I'll throw in, do what my parents do exact opposite.
You got it already, right?
No, I think, I think more kids, say in our past, growing up in adolescence, might have acted out here and there and needed control, but for the most part, I think we followed our kids' advice more than the kids follow the parents' advice today.
But you think it's safe
They're
to say
influenced differently than we were. Huh?
that at least some limit testing is normal?
Right.
Yes.
There's a lot of peer pressure nowadays. A lot of kids tend to give into it because the discipline in their homes are a lot different from when they were maybe when you guys were kids.
Right.
Most of the time now we have like one parent or something.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Emotional roller coaster.
Emotional roller coaster.
Oh, I like that.
Yes. Bernie.
Yeah, one of the developments now, typical now is that they've got the damn Uzi in their hand.
Smartphone.
I beg your pardon?
There's one over here. Yes.
Which is
Raging hormones.
Anxiety,
Anxiety, yes.
risk-taking.
Experimental.
That's all pretty normal stuff, right? We can all think back to when we were late middle school through high school, maybe freshman in college. There were some challenging times
Oh, yeah.
for a lot of different reasons.
That look familiar to anybody's teenage brain?
So there's a lot going on in there, and a fair bit of it isn't what we're hoping for as adults, right? Let me see where it is. So this is attention to responsibility.
That's too large.
Right here, we've got some communication skills. Obviously, love, ego, rebellion, coolness gauge. That's the peer pressure and the trying to fit in, right?
Where's the screen time?
Yeah.
The time they spend, look at,
That's the skull. All of that is happening inside the screen time, right? So we talked about changes in hormones, increases in height and weight. We didn't talk about that, but there's tons of the hormonal changes are causing a lot of physical changes. Body hair, sweating, all of that stuff. Mental changes, developing more abstract thinking skills, logic and reasoning. They're forming their own beliefs, which can look like the limit testing and the challenging of authority. heightened focus on physical concerns. Emotional changes, the roller coaster. Not only are our emotions changing a lot, the peaks and valleys that you're feeling during adolescence are more intense. You are more angry, you are more sad.
And then you have some of the social changes. Oh, and before that, the risk-taking and impulsivity as well. Someone brought that up as well. So again, when you're doing some outdoor activities, you're always gonna have that one or two folks that wanna kind of take it beyond. So setting those, here's the expectations, here's what's safe. How many of you know there's gonna be at least one that's gonna try to push it beyond that? Social changes, everything to do with identity. Who am I? What's my role in my family? Do my peers like me? The increase of peer influence. We have a lot now too with, you know, in my day it was like cigarette smoking and smoking pot. And now it's the electronic cigarettes or the inhaling of the nicotine. Or it's other harder drugs, opioid crisis, those kinds of things. Then a lot, I think the world's changed a lot as far as awareness of sexual identity. There's a lot more kind of openness about questioning your sexual identity, but also still some stigma and some uncertainty to do with that. And then a key one for everybody at that age is learning how to manage relationships. Kelly mentioned too how, and other people have mentioned how the family has changed. A lot of single parent families. We had a statistic that, what was it, over 6,000 children in New Hampshire, 8,000 children in New Hampshire do not live with one of their parents. So they live with either another relative, a grandparent, a friend, and their own parents are nowhere to be found. So that's all kind of typical adolescent behavior, and when you look at this list, that's rough in and of itself, right? I mean, we all made it through, but we all can think of a story or two where it's like, wow, I made it, I can't believe it, or, oh, I can't believe I did that.
One thing I don't see here that I wonder if it plays into this is economics. The economic
Yes,
situation in the child's life.
yes.
Being at home.
Kids who don't have money versus kids whose families do have money.
And that actually results and manifests in a lot of different ways, right? So there's sort of the thing that I think people initially assume when you bring that up, which is anxiety about their role in their peer group and what do people think of me and how do I belong and how do I fit? How do I participate if I can't afford to? That sort of thing. But it also can manifest in other ways. Generally speaking, children with lower socioeconomic status have less access to physical and mental health care. They are not able to go to the doctor for a variety of reasons. They also, generally speaking, aren't able to access food, water, or housing in the same way.
Will we be having dinner?
Sorry?
Will we be having dinner tonight?
Exactly, exactly. And then that brings a whole other level of stress and anxiety, right? So,
You know, one that really struck me that I heard recently was one kid gets an iPad from Santa at Christmas. One kid gets coloring books because the parents can't afford the iPad, but from Santa. Meaning that the kid who got the coloring books is being told that he was not as, that Santa knows he wasn't as good of a kid as the kid who got the iPad. And, you know, and just thinking about those kind of, you talk about the anxiety of where that lays into the element of socioeconomic.
yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts about typical adolescent development? Yeah?
Well, one of the concerns that I have is that, you know, when back in the day when there was a family, then there was also a father figure to look up to and emulate. And kids don't have that now. So what they do have, and as far as forming their own identities, I don't know that a lot of them actually do for a long time, into their 20s or 30s.
Yes.
But what they do is emulate what they see in mass media.
Yes.
So they emulate, you know, the rappers,
Yep.
and the hip hoppers, and the rock stars, and the women who dress with like nothing but a whatever.
Say no more.
And so these are the people today that they look up to, and this is something that if we're trying to reach them and understand them, we need to understand what is important in their lives, based on what they think is important in their lives.
Sure. Yeah, and I think just to sort of rephrase what you just said, is it's not that if there is not a consistent parental figure available to a student that they don't have a role model. It means that they're going to find it somewhere else. So they're looking for a role model because they have so much uncertainty and there's so much change happening for them, and they need some guideposts to know, am I heading the right way? What should I do? What's the right decision? Does it make sense? Am I normal?
I wonder if with some of the kids that give us a lot of trouble, I wonder if they can really think that way. You know, they come with such tortured backgrounds. I question whether they even ask those questions because it's not the way they function. They function at a different level. It's more of survival.
Sure.
You know, we say we give them a wonderful lunch at Franklin Pierce. That's because that's true. That's their best meal of the day. In some cases, it could be the only meal of the day. We finally learned, we didn't do this in our first couple of years, but we now realize that they come there with nothing in their little tummies. So we pass out food now early on in the morning. So food is a big thing, or food deprivation. The word deprivation is, I think, it's intrinsic to their lives, unfortunately. So I think we're dealing with these kids who don't have anything like the so-called normal nuclear family that a lot of us were raised with, and we still made our mistakes and survived. But they have a worse situation to deal with because there's oftentimes nobody at home that they can follow, or there's nobody that they want to have as their guidepost, and it's just getting through the day. There's either drugs or alcohol or physical or verbal abuse, and these kids are just tossed in one way or the other, and so they're just trying to survive, and we're trying to rescue those people in sort of a nice, soft social basket, and help deliver them through the middle school years so that they don't drop out of school and go on to high school, because we're told by those who are more learned than most of us that this is the time where school continuation becomes critical. So much, I talk too much, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right.
Can I make a point? And I think there's a lot, I think for us, there's a lot of anxiety about just the small number, but significant enough number of kids that were really a challenge, that were the top tier of that triangle.
Yep.
But I think one thing that it's easy for us to lose focus on is I think the majority of our kids are that bottom tier, that are getting fed, that do have some stable either parent or parents at home, and that this group of people becomes that stable role model in addition. So it's like we can really focus on the ones on that top tier that we really struggle with, but I want to make sure that we also don't, and it gets hopeless if all of our kids were the top tier, we'd be in a world of hurt. But I think that we all also know that the impact that we have on the majority of these kids, right? And that a lot of these kids who, you know, really the reason why they're with us is because they need a little academic help, or, you know, they otherwise wouldn't be going to a camp. So it's not like they're having these dramatic crises in life beyond adolescence, which is a dramatic crisis in itself.
Yes.
But that what we are providing and have provided for years now has been that transition and that stability. And we can think about all those students that we've seen grow and change, and the impact when we see them in the supermarket, when we see them on the street, and that response. Like, we know we're doing that. And I think that it's important for us to also differentiate that not all of the kids are coming from that extreme situation.
Fair.
And that the majority are the ones that are in that bottom tier that we've really been having positive impacts with for a decade. So I just want to make sure, because we're saying a lot about how horrible some of these kids' lives are, and there are some kids who are have terrible backgrounds they're coming from, but that's not all the kids.
Yeah, but you have to remember that you're dealing with a group of volunteers.
Oh yeah.
These are people who weren't trained as teachers, they weren't trained as psychologists, they weren't trained as behavioral specialists. And for that group of people, all you need is 2 or 3 kids to just drive everybody crazy.
Yeah.
And guess what the volunteers do? They
Yeah.
go away.
Yeah.
You know? And we have 45 people in our Rotary, 40 in our Rotary Club, okay? And probably 75% of the members are involved in BEST. And on a day-to-day basis, maybe 50%, maybe not even. That's not very many people against 90 kids. And you have 4 or 5 kids who are making everybody's day miserable, and what happens? People say, hey, I didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
I'll see you around. And so the sustainability becomes an issue.
Yeah.
And I say to you now that that's why we're here, because sustainability is an issue today. It's not coming, it's here, and we're trying to deal with it and figure out a way. So I disagree with you a little bit that I think we need to shine the brightest light on tier 1 and 2. I don't think we're here because of tier 3,
Right.
whichever way it was. We're not here because of the bottom tier. That's not what we're doing here today.
Yeah.
We're here because of the middle and the top tier.
Yeah.
And if we don't figure those out and find a way to deal with those intelligently and in a way that people are comfortable with, we won't be able to sustain this.
Yeah. Great
We'll-
points.
We'll be doomed.
I want to reinforce what Bill said.
Yep.
Not only do members not want to show up, members want to leave the club. And there are, I can state several former members who left because of the best camp experience.
The negative experience.
Negative experience.
And last year, several people whose tags were there, who signed up to be volunteers, who were members or are members of Rotary, did not show up at camp, which is why we've been reaching out through our leaders for volunteers who are not Rotary members to try to build up the numbers of volunteers so we don't rely exclusively upon Rotary members, because some of us old-timer Rotary members are having a tough time hanging in there with it. So I welcome the volunteers, and I give you a pat on the back and a position in sainthood if you can do this, because you're doing God's work for sure, and you're helping us with these kids. So I commend those of you who are here who are not Rotary members and are willing to become volunteers. I tip my hat to you.
So make us smart.
And make us patient.
So we're gonna shift a little now, and I handed out some cards to a few people. Some of you have a card with the name of a mental health disorder, and others of you have a definition. I'm going to name, these are the most common mental health conditions that we see currently in our youth, and actually as we approach adulthood as well. I'm going to just read each one first so that the rest of you who don't have cards know. And then I'm going to ask each of you with a definition to read it, and then we'll see if the person with the card recognizes it and or the rest of us can help. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is psychosis, what is bipolar disorder, because these are all things. Even some of your children in that universal level may have depression, eating disorders, anxiety disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity, also known as ADHD, and substance use disorder. So could I have someone who has one of the definitions just read that out loud to the group, and we'll see which of those that I read that might be, and then if you have that card, and think you're it, we call it Find Your Match. Who would like to read a definition? Yes, please.
Okay. Youth with these disorders experience episodes in which they lose some touch with reality. which can severely disrupt the young person's thinking, emotions, and behavior.
Keep your voice on.
Yeah, we couldn't
Can't hear you, Hal.
Youth with these disorders experience episodes in which they lose some touch with reality, which can severely disrupt the young person's thinking, emotions, and behavior.
Depression?
Okay, psychosis.
Substance
Psychosis is what it is, so that is actually a mental health disorder, where those things, sometimes they're with us in reality, and sometimes they may be, hearing voices or seeing things, or just really struggling internally with what's happening in their mind. Okay,
It's worth it to note though that some of these disorders overlap.
yes,
So for instance, bipolar, there could be an element of psychosis in
absolutely,
bipolar.
absolutely, and we have a few slides to go into it in a little more detail as well. Okay, someone else with a definition? Yes.
A disorder affecting 3 to 5% of school-age children in which inattention, overactivity, impulsivity, or a combination of these symptoms are present.
Yes, yes.
These also apply to a lot of Rotarians. Symptoms include being easily distracted, having difficulty finishing schoolwork, putting off tasks that require sustained mental effort, and being disorganized.
None of you have ever seen campers with those symptoms, right?
ADD, I have it to this day.
Okay, ADD or ADHD. The H is for the hyperactivity. There's also an ADD, which is attention deficit disorder, which means that sometimes, again, because of other distracting thoughts or things like that, they may not be able to engage. Sometimes that one isn't picked up as much as the hyperactivity because we all see that. But it might be that child who, you know, you're in the middle of a discussion and they're kind of looking around, what's going on outside the window, oh, look at the bird in the tree, and you need to bring them back. But the hyperactivity one, I think, both in a camp setting and in a school setting, is easily recognizable. We never have anyone miss that definition. Good job. Okay, another definition.
I was just gonna add, they
Sure.
also have executive function disorder.
Yes.
So even though you do have their attention, they have a hard time going from step one to step two
Absolutely.
without some direction and support.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
He's a new, they just came in here, we haven't, we've all given a little background of who we are.
Yes, please share with us.
He has
I'm a
an educational background.
I'm a former Rotarian, but I'm an educator for 43 years.
Excellent.
And I'm here on behalf of Tanya, who couldn't be here.
Okay.
And I've been working with her about trying to re-examine the curriculum so
Excellent.
that we can get these kids really engaged and turned on to learning.
Excellent. And what age group did you primarily work with as an educator?
Everywhere from pre-kindergarten to college.
Excellent.
And
Great.
more importantly, what's your name?
Nathaniel Pierce?
Nice to meet you, Nathaniel.
That's what they used to be.
Doesn't know how to spell it.
Okay, another definition for us?
I have one.
Okay.
A mood disorder that affects 9% of the youth ages between 12 and 17, characterized by an unusual sad mood, loss of interest, enjoyment, and for some, irritability and a tendency to snap at others.
Depression.
Depression.
Depression, yes. Excellent.
Nothing wrong with that.
Another definition?
I'll read mine.
A third of the people, often female, who develop these disorders experience their first episodes between the ages of 11 through 15. Youth may have low self-esteem, may measure their worth based on their weight or body shape, and may take extreme measures in an attempt to control their weight.
Eating disorders. Eating disorders, okay.
Has to be that,
Great. Another one?
Youth with this disorder experience times of depression mixed with episodes of normal mood and mania, elevated mood, increased energy, and overconfidence. Youth may experience more rapid mood changes than adults, appear more irritable or aggressive, and engage in increased risk-taking.
Bipolar?
Bipolar.
Very good.
Could be suicidal.
All right, here's one.
Yes, and sometimes that would could lead to that, yes.
Often co-occurring with other types of mental health problems. These disorders can lead to difficulty fulfilling school and family responsibilities, increased risk-taking, and legal problems. I'm not gonna say.
Substance.
Substance.
Substance. Substance use or misuse disorder, as we call it now. Is that everybody that has a definition? I've got one more. Okay, so I should have one more person with a card that hasn't been identified yet. 1 in 8 youth will experience one or more of these disorders, which can be ongoing or situational. Symptoms include general worry, fear in social settings, and physical problems such as headaches and an upset stomach.
Anxiety.
Very good, okay. Excellent job. When you're up for your next break, you can just drop those cards up on the table, that would be great.
Good idea, right?
So the information that we just went over, the Find Your Match activity, as well as some of the information I'm about to present, is just a small excerpt from another training that our office provides called Youth Mental Health First Aid. It's an 8-hour training that really gets into the weeds about identifying the signs and symptoms that a youth might be having a mental health issue, and gives some tools in terms of what to do to refer them to someone who can provide help. So that's a training that our team offers, but we wanted to give you a little bit of the information from that to potentially help you in your planning and thinking about that going forward.
So just a question about that. When you refer to something like that, is that something that we can take advantage of? And how, if so, where and how?
A completely free training that we provide. You can either go to our website, which is listed in the flyers and we'll talk about a little bit later, and sign up for a training that we have pre-scheduled for the general public, or we can come back here and do it just like this.
Good,
But it's
thank
a whole day. You'd have to be stuck with us for a whole day.
So as we go through this additional information about mental illness in youth, keep in mind that this is layered on top of what we just talked about in terms of typical adolescent development, okay? So how common?
What percentage of children are afflicted with any one of those?
Good timing. Did you okay to ask that question? Yeah, so.
I'm going to the eye doctor later.
So how common is it, right? Here you are seeing some prevalence percentages for youth with various categories of disorders. So about 32% of youth aged 13 to 18 have an anxiety disorder, so about a third. Of those that have an anxiety disorder, around 8% experience a severe impact. And these are clinically defined in what's called the DSM-5, which is where all of these diagnoses live from a scientific sense. So, because neither you nor I really need to get into that level of detail, just know that if it's they're experiencing severe impact, it's dramatically impacting what we say is their ability to live, laugh, love, and learn. Their ability to be fully present and engage in a positive way.
Is that 8% of the 31% or 8% of the universe?
8% of the 31%, I believe, yes. But if I come back to do the other training, I will make sure I know that for certain. Behavior disorders, about 19% and 10% severe impact. Mood disorders, 14% prevalence and 11% severe impact. So if you have a mood disorder, odds are you are experiencing significant impact on your daily life and your ability to be present and engage. Substance use disorders, about 11.5% of adolescents aged 13 to 18 have one of those. Diagnosable, right, that it reaches the level that it can be diagnosed. With substance use disorders, we don't track severe impact, because if you've reached the level that you can be diagnosed with a substance use disorder, you are being severely impacted. Yep.
The kids probably know the behavior they're demonstrating, but do they know why?
don't know that I could fully answer that. I would imagine sometimes yes, sometimes no. And it depends a lot on the education that is being provided to the youth about the sort of signs and symptoms that they're displaying, and whether or not they've been referred. Yeah?
Well, when we talk about the emotional roller coaster and the risk-taking, biologically, you know, I used to go with my kids, you can squish through the skull, and these two touch. There's a part of the brain that is the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain. And that always works with kids, you know. And this part is the problem-solving part. That now, because of all the social media, the computer screen and all that, they're saying now it's not being developed till close to 30. Okay, so this developed, always working, and this not always kicking in, is not to be used as an excuse to do boneheaded stuff or whatever.
Right.
But it's just awareness. You know, it allows people to say, okay, I need to back up. Some of it isn't deliberate, you know, like with an 11-year-old. You know, they have to be taught the education piece of certain things. They have to be taught the coping strategies, even something basic as, okay, take deep breaths. And I know it sounds little compared to maybe what you were dealing with last summer, but it's those. I mean, we do it easily, but we have brains that are finished developing. You know what I mean? So there's a biological.
You're making some assumptions.
Well, some of us are going backwards, but you know, and also the piece of the behavioral piece. You know, I really, I'm not feeling like it's real appropriate for us to tag the behavioral challenge piece with economics, because you look at where we are right now with the substance use and the addiction. There's not one prototype, you know, and, you know, when this happens with our children, we want to, as parents, say, oh my goodness, what did I do wrong? But there's not that you should relinquish your responsibility, but there's a lot of factors with these kids. That social media piece is huge. So does that answer your question?
It helps, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are these exclusive percentages? So you'd only fit into one category? Because if that's the case, you're dealing with 76% of the entire population has one of these going on.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So as somebody, I think it was you said earlier, a lot of times mental illnesses are co-occurring. So a lot of times people have more than one.
And what I was gonna just point out is that behavior disorders, how they look to us, any of those other disorders could lead to behavior disorders.
So we're looking at an overall prevalence, and this kind of gets to your point, of all youth age 13 to 18, it's actually true for humans, all humans, adults as well, that we're looking at about a 20 to 22% prevalence of mental illness. So sort of the informal way I say it is about 1 in 5 people of all ages experience a mental illness at some point in their life. A couple more highlights. So as the card said, about 3% experience an eating disorder, and about 11% have a diagnosable ADD or ADHD.
And when we say this in schools, I say it's way more than that. But again, based on the whole population of the youth, that's the percentage. And when you think about it, there are some things here which may look like something to do with an attention deficit, may not be diagnosed, and may only be lasting through that typical phase as well.
Did you say that in school it's way more than this? I
No, I
didn't
think
understand
in
you.
schools, teachers think it's way
Oh,
more than
thank
this.
you.
And if you think of camp, you may say it's way more than 11%.
Right.
But there are lots of different variables, and these are the actual diagnosed condition of that. I know I worked in special ed, and I would say the majority of my students had issues around attention and or hyperactivity. But then I would go into the larger school, and I would see that, okay, so even though the majority of my students do, it's not kind of like that universal level, it's not everybody.
Well, are some of these kids being treated and medically for an ADD or ADHD? Would you know that they had it or diagnosed as it with the disease or not? I mean,
You
Are
may,
they
you may not.
coded when they come into the school? In other words, do the teachers
That's
know?
a whole other lecture.
Yeah.
There are systems in the school based on federal law about identifying students who may have a special need. That is not just a diagnosis. So there may be children from these statistics that are referred for that process, but there are several conditions that have to be met for that child to be eligible for those services. And that's why we focus so much on that universal level of that triangle, because the more we provide for all children, the more, even if you have a mental illness or some kind of a special need, the more you should be able to access if we set it up right. And so then those people with those really intensive needs kind of rise to, they need something that's a little different.
Let's go right here. Go
Okay.
ahead.
This, my question is a lot of this information included in the education curriculum for middle school, and how early are they exposed to, you know, the basic concepts we're talking about here?
Michelle, do you want to speak to that? Do you have mental health as part of any curriculum in the
Health and
school?
wellness.
Okay.
If you want more information, I would urge you to go to the Hallowell Center website. Ned Hallowell is a psychiatrist who works with ADD kids, and the best way to describe a kid who has that condition, it's like they have brains that are like Ferraris, but they don't have any brakes. And sometimes medication is the brake, and sometimes it's just the structure of the school, or the structure of home, or the structure of camp that makes the difference in the child's life.
And that's a really good point, and again, some of what we're doing here today may give you some ideas on, you know, maybe what you need to do around the structure and the, you know, how formal are the expectations of what, do students know when they come in, what's expected, and if not, how do we teach them that? And if you provide that information, again, more of that universal level may be okay. Oh, so many questions.
Let's go to Jed first, because he hasn't spoken this round.
I'm getting a little confused. We're getting a lot of information here,
Yes.
a lot of statistics
Yep.
and behavioral identification. To what extent do you expect us to be a clinician, or, I mean, what are we?
0%.
Pardon?
0%.
Oh, good.
Yeah, all we expect you to do.
I can meet that threshold.
But I
Or
mean,
below.
are we supposed to be able to identify?
No. No.
So we're just supposed, you're gonna teach us how to respond to these different behaviors, is that the approach?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, so the purpose of this part of the presentation is to give you a sense of, what the experience of some of your campers is like.
Okay. What's not normal?
What we're dealing with.
Yep.
Yes.
Let's get on.
Yes.
And just a quick question concerning the camp. Do we know ahead of time what kids are identified and what they're identified as?
No.
You can just,
So then, for instance, if a child comes to us who is, has some sort of a learning disability in writing, without knowing that this person has an identification of, you know, a writing learning disorder, we're asking them to do the same things as the children without a learning disability in that area, which is going to lead to frustration, which is going to lead to behavioral issues.
I apologize, I actually don't know too much about the inner workings of Best Camp, but I believe I heard that there is an application. I don't know what categories are on that application, but there's an opportunity for families to let you know what to expect from their child.
That's not always accurate.
It's not always accurate, but a lot of times it is. You know, a lot of times a parent or a guardian will know, Johnny can't sit still after 11:30. You should know that if he's coming to camp.
Do we know
Johnny
that?
struggles with depression, Johnny has.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is a category on the application that they can divulge information like that if they please. Oftentimes, they leave it blank,
Correct.
and then we figure it out ourselves.
right.
So, sometimes, yes, most of the time, no.
And
But we don't
the
know
school
that
cannot
Joey,
provide that
we don't
information.
know that Joey or Bethany are ADHD or we simply.
Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
mom and dad call and offer that information, which is
Right.
fine if they want to do that, but we can't request that information of them. So we leave it kind of as, is there anything you would like us to know about your child? You can put it here, and so it's kind of an open-ended thing, so if they choose to do it, they can, but they're not required to do it.
So here's the question.
come to
Alan,
us as
Bernie,
volunteers
Sheila, et cetera,
for the
we
camp?
don't know what we have. I'm not sure if you're allowed by law to let us know that Bethany or Joey have this disorder.
Like he said, the
So how do we
school as
identify?
an institution cannot, but the
Right.
parent can. As far as you all, getting that information from the application that the parents fill in themselves, I'm not sure what the procedure
Well, there is none.
or
So,
going to be.
I'll-
So
Sounds
there's
like
no
awareness.
way,
Sounds like awareness.
there's no way
It's
for
not
us
like
as
that.
volunteers to know what's going on and all this stuff that you're talking about. I mean, let's boil it down.
Well,
We're
let's-
still in the dark.
Let's finish the
We
presentation
have
and
to
maybe we will know.
learn, Bill, if I may, we have to learn from our own experience with these kids individually, with nothing to do with guidance from the camp or from the school system or anybody else. Is that correct?
I am not the best person to
Well,
answer
then,
that
that's
question.
what we're facing right here. We're looking for answers. At
And
least
I'll
I am.
also add to that too, is that, a lot of the, kids that I have, either their parents have talked to me, or maybe a teacher from the school district was saying, oh, this child was in my class, this is what to expect, have been some of the best campers, because they're in a different environment, they're not at school, they're doing the activities they enjoy more, and they were an angel the whole time, and I did not have any issues with them, you know, but that's not always true.
Well, and although you can't identify certain children who have specific conditions, there is a lot of information that schools would have, about different ways of dealing with maybe certain kinds of behaviors, or for children who struggle with writing, here are some strategies, and I don't know the interaction with the schools and the camp. But, you know, there may be some sharing that could happen there just with overall strategies that, what we found, you know, in all my years in special ed, what we found is, wow, a lot of these strategies that are really good for someone with a writing disability are good for everybody. And it's just I love what you're thinking of doing around getting children's interest through comics and things like that. Because what you're doing is you're really focusing in on how can we grab their interest? And so if you know that the worksheets don't work, then you keep, you know, you try different strategies. And sometimes even talking with students. Maybe in addition to the application, you send out an interest survey so that as you're planning your more academically focused things, you could say, wow, this guy's interested in fishing, or, you know, and maybe, you know, in the coordination of things, you have activities and or stories about those things that interest some of the children coming in. And I know there's so many questions, and you've had your hand up for a long time.
Well, I was just gonna, another curveball through experience, on the ADHD level, if the child is medicated, that ADHD is now showing other signs as a byproduct of the medication,
Could
so
absolutely occur.
that's a whole, that's a whole different ballgame. When you're thinking it's this, when it's really this, being treated with a certain medication and it's a side effect, so.
Correct.
I just think it's looking for symptoms in these children.
Yeah.
And then addressing, okay, how do we reach out to that child and their special needs,
Yeah.
because they're standing out over the crowd.
Yes, and what also I think I see happening is you're identifying maybe some gaps in, like, okay, so we show you how to better recognize some of these signs. That's great. Now, what is the chain of command for getting that addressed? And again, that's one of those things we leave you with, but with the right people in the room, and I think we've got the right people in the room, there can be ways of exploring, well, what should we do when that happens? Because again, you're here in a certain role, and in the longer training we do, that's the very first thing we say, is that we are not teaching you how to diagnose or treat these things. We only want people in the front line to be able to recognize and to say, oh, maybe there's something more than he's using bad language. Maybe there's really something behind that that needs to be looked into. Or maybe if we structure and talk a little bit about what we expect for language while they're here as campers, and then we remind them when they use the bad language, oh, look, here's what our expectations say about that. Let's get back on track. So the more you sometimes structure that for everybody, some of those children who need more have that need for that and for those reminders, and sometimes even in how do we do that?
Yeah, and on the flip side of that equation that you were just addressing there, true too, is I've had multiple parents come up to me and say, this is Johnny or Jill's time to be off their medication in the summer,
Yeah.
and that's why they're acting the way they are, is because they have a hard time controlling themselves because mom and dad say, well, you had to take it all year, so we're gonna take you off it now, and then they're just going nuts, and they can't help it.
Absolutely.
If I may, my own experience, when I come across a kid that has one of these conditions, I've gone to the teacher from the school there in the thing, and I say, this is what I'm running up against. And she would say, well, your observations are right, we have to do the same thing in school all the time. But they can't, and having the time or the ability to tell me, this is what you should do.
Okay.
But to confirm what you've had, I think the teachers, maybe they're not supposed to, but they'll kind of nod and say, like that every day in school, and I think God bless the woman for hanging in there. If you face this every day, I can hardly face it for an hour.
Yeah.
Let's get practical. Can someone tell me a behavior that you are seeing in campers that you don't want to see anymore? One word. Sorry?
Talking.
Talking. You don't want them to talk.
Insolence.
Ever.
Insolence.
Okay, say more about that.
The word no.
Yes.
Sorry.
Pardon me for saying it this way, but
Please.
go fuck yourself.
Okay.
I beg your pardon, this is a family program.
So,
Let's,
Yeah.
inappropriate language,
Disrespect.
no, it isn't inappropriate language only, it starts behind me. Don't tell me what to do, don't touch me, you have no business telling me what to do.
Okay.
Yeah, you wanna see me whip it out, that's what a kid told me. I got mad about it.
No, I'm not gonna go out in the
Sorry.
hallway with you.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Get your hands off me.
obstinate.
Define.
Defiant. What else? What else are you seeing that you don't want to see anymore?
Disruptive,
Disruptive.
disruptive.
Probably both in talking and sort of changing the course of the conversation, but also disruptive in terms of behaviors and acting out that way.
The instructor's sharing some information, he or she's too busy talking and doing other things, being fully oblivious to what everybody else knows.
Okay. So they're not necessarily focused on the activity at hand, sometimes. Yep. Other thoughts?
The word no.
Sorry?
The word no.
The word no. I'm sorry to pick on you, but as someone who's gone through the camp before, are there behaviors that you saw in your fellow campers that made your experience worse?
How kids talked about how they didn't want to be there. So
Okay.
that could have been their choice to make to be there. And they took somebody else's spot at the camp that could have really wanted to go.
Okay.
But instead they're sitting there telling people they don't want to do it and they're not appreciating the time and effort everybody else puts in.
Okay. So they're kind of ungrateful, they're not particularly connected or care about the opportunities that you have.
And can I ask you for clarification, when you were actually a camper, did you have that awareness about the other campers? Or is that something as you've come back that you realize?
I kind of realized it over the course of the years.
Okay. So it wasn't something that necessarily disrupted you as a camper because you were there because you wanted to be?
Yeah.
Okay. So with some maturity and growth and, wow, that really made an impact on my life, you then were able to put those pieces.
We used to call this negative attitude.
Yeah.
The question that I had, obviously being new, was are there parents sending their kids just because? they want the summer off, and the kids really don't wanna go.
I'm sure he has that.
I mean, it's society today, it's how
Yeah?
I think we need to keep it in perspective that it's really a 16-day program.
Yep.
And so, it's not the whole summer.
Sure.
Not the whole month, yeah.
I find it's a problem to get the kids to participate if you put something out there, you know, speak about this or speak about that. It's dead silent. That's the only time. It's hard to engage.
Is that whether you ask them to say something, write something,
Right.
draw something?
Particularly say
Act
something.
something out?
Yeah.
But particularly say, okay.
I think that's particularly true if they don't think it's cool.
So they might be struggling with that peer perception that we talked about earlier of their participation in the camp. They might be struggling, you're thinking, the other piece of that would be their confidence in speaking out. Anything else that needs to make that list? Yeah.
I haven't followed some, but quite often, particularly last year, some in previous years, in the afternoon activities, whether it's a ball game, quest ball, or I heard, I'm not gonna do it. Go see the teacher, they sit down, try to talk with them, you know, but sometimes they just sit on the sidelines, that's it. They don't
There's just no
participate.
participation.
And I'm pretty defiant about it.
Anything else that needs to make the list for current behaviors we are displeased with?
That's enough, isn't it?
Just making sure, just wanna make sure we get it all.
bullying.
Bullying?
Bullying, student to student bullying?
Yeah.
How about student to adult?
Adult. Any adult to student? No?
Me once.
Anything else? So, let's talk about the other side. Picture your ideal camper.
Not if it's camp.
Huh?
Stop it.
Oh, yes, there is some.
Let's talk about some of what's the expected behavior? What would you like all of your children and youth to walk in, and how would that be?
Participatory.
Right.
Helpful.
Respectful.
Respectful.
I would say that they start on that page and end here. Like what I want to see is the change. Like if they all came in and they all acted that way, I would feel like, oh, well, this is great, it's
They don't
wonderful,
need
but
it.
it's not, it's not that impact. It's when I see kids that are really, I'll take like kayaking for example, like really disconnected, really not engaged, really, and then you get them in a boat and their whole attitude changes, and that you get that conversation on a lake that you never would get when they were, you know, back in the dining hall, you know, and so it's that kind of, the expected behavior I want is that opening up, that
So you're able to make an impact.
yeah.
Owen?
Yeah, confident leaders, which was our theme last year.
Can I ask, on your theme, confident leaders, how did you explain that to the participants when they came in? Did we just say our theme is confident leaders, or how did we explain to them what is a confident leader? What are the qualities that a confident leader has?
There was a banner on the wall, and the teachers mentioned it quite a lot in their opening services.
We try to integrate it a little bit with the academics as well, like we had a STEM type project this year, as far as each of them having a different role, like a group of 5, and then with the volunteer, helping them, maybe one was the, the supplies leader, one was the, so kind of like the little things in the academics too, to feel like they're taking on more of a leadership role in that.
Okay?
I would add demonstrated responsibility on that list.
Are there some, ways that they could do that that stand out to you?
Part of that would be some of the description above.
Okay.
Responsibility says, okay, they are participating, they are helpful, they're respectful,
Okay.
et cetera, et cetera.
Like in the dining hall, some of them will always clean the table, some of them will always make sure that things look the way they're supposed to look when we came in, they left that.
Can I ask you, just out of curiosity, is that a prescribed role, or do they do that?
It's encouraged, it's encouraged.
Polite.
Polite? How about your perspective?
They have to be more appreciative.
So more grateful?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Also, again, out of curiosity, do the campers know that they were selected? Do they know that it isn't an opportunity that's open to everybody?
That was made much more evident this year, right? That
Yeah.
they were selected.
Yeah, so, you know,
My
first,
grandson was chosen, and he said, and he had also been set up for PEP camp over the summer, which is, you go because your grades are not the best and
Sure.
you need the extra help. He came home saying, I was on vacation, he called me, Mimi, I got selected I got chosen to go to best. So we made a point of making them feel that it was,
yeah.
they were special in a good way.
Anything else that needs to make that list of what you expect from your campers? Best case scenario when they're here. So, we are abandoning the vast majority of what we're gonna do here. But, I do wanna show you this. So there's this thing called the 40 developmental assets. And if you would look in your folder, there is a sheet that says 40 developmental assets at the top. This list of 40 things is the result of 2 decades?
More than that.
3 decades of research.
Started in the 50s.
Well, there you go, that's more than 2 decades. Of research of adolescents in the United States ages 12 to 18. And the researchers have been trying to figure out what makes the difference for a student who is successful and has a positive life experience versus those that don't. And they've boiled it down to these 40 things. They're categorized into external assets and internal assets. And then further categorized internal assets, there's a commitment to learning, positive values. On the sheet you're looking at, you can see that those are further defined.
They're at the bottom.
Social competencies and positive identity. External assets bucketed into support, empowerment, boundaries and expectations, and constructive use of time. So research has proven that if these assets exist, there's going to be positive behaviors, good relationships, positive outcomes in school, extracurricular activities, in the family environment, generally in the public. Now look at your lists.
Yeah. Because I took it personal.
I will say, as you're looking at those 40 things, the researchers have identified the most important one. There's one that sits above all other 39. Colleen, do you want to do the reveal?
I want to know if anybody can guess. Yes.
Family support.
That's important, but it's not number one necessarily. Yes.
Well, when I did my dissertation on caring about 20 years ago, the kids identified 2 components. One, that they feel safe in their environment as really important, and number 2, that the teacher smiled at them.
Okay. So those are both, again, very important and are definitely related. One more guess, yeah?
Well, I'll just say, one seventh grade girl said, caring is like humidity. You can't see it, but you can feel it.
Absolutely, I love that.
I was gonna say, just the sense of feeling valued as a young.
And the number one way that makes our children and youth feel valued, and many of you said it in your introductions actually, which really impressed me, having at least one caring adult, someone who you know you can go to is not have input from them. Because that's what helps to bring in, how can you make it interesting and exciting for them?
Say that again, you cannot have, what'd you just say?
You can't really do this without them.
Yeah, okay.
You really need their input. They may need you to help say, this is what, this is what this looks like. Or you guys might have, here's what we came up with. Can you give us examples that are meaningful to you as well?
Yeah, thank you for coming up with that. Dan, I think what I'm sensing, given how we had that day one, the question becomes, how might we take what we're learning here and perhaps integrate some of that, which we may not be doing, or might be doing differently, so that maybe there are those breakouts, the covenants, whatever, to, versus one large group in a room.
Absolutely.
And, you got 90 kids and some of whom are being disrupted, most of whom are being good, but, it's like herding cats.
Yeah.
So I think there might be an opportunity there that day one to set some of those expectations and take an interest in this and that.
Yeah, I think they would have some investment in that then, since they're coming up with a portion of it in conjunction with what we already expect of them. I think that could be a good accountability factor for us.
I like your word, investment.
And the other thing you can do with a graphic, what's called graphic organizer like this, is look at the kinds of activities you have throughout the 16 days and say, wow, we have our overall expectations, but how does that look when they're in the learning aspect? How does that look when they're in the canoe? How does that look if we're on a field trip? And have them come up with it. And maybe like the night before the big field trip, before they leave that day, you go over, okay, so tomorrow we're going to blah, 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 let's go over, what do we expect? And so then, it doesn't mean they're gonna be 100%, but what it means is they have an understanding of what you're expecting. Because right now they're feeling like, oh, I don't get them, I don't know what they're talking about, and that's when you get the no's, and that's when you get the not participating. Sometimes it's a trust thing for people, and I bet if you thought about it, how they start versus how they end, there are some folks that are participating more as you go along because they've developed that trust. And always remember that one caring adult. And on your worst day of camp, because you will have one, no matter whether things get better or worse, but when you go home, don't feel defeated because you never know who you're that one person for. And I will tell you, I worked many years ago in the Boston area with children who we used to refer to as juvenile delinquents. Well, I had this wonderful conversation with a young man this past weekend. He was in my very first class. As an adult, he found me on social media. He calls me every Christmas. He calls me every Mother's Day. He called me when his mother died. He called me when my mother died. Now, would I have thought all those days I went home saying, oh, he tossed his desk again. Oh, he beat up this kid. And these were tough kids. I never dreamed I had that impact. And we had a conversation, but I said, do you know, Daryl, I talk about you every time I present to people. And they're like, oh my God, that's wonderful. You may never know, but you need to know that you are that person. And you have been in many roles you've played in life. And he's just had this knack of like, on my worst day, I get home and have a phone message. It's like, oh, and he's a grandfather, and he lives out of state now, but that's the impact you can have. And we can help you today to start. We're more than willing to come back for more training or for some work sessions with whoever's organizing things. And it's not going to be 100%, and there are going to be children who need more. But maybe you can come up with a system when we do encounter a child who needs more. Who can we refer that person to, maybe to problem solve with? And maybe to have a separate plan like this, because some folks might need that as well. But structure, I mean, we all said it, listening to our parents, you know, focusing on an activity, these are not skills that come naturally to children anymore, we have to teach them. So, I'll get off my soapbox now, but.
No,
That was a good tale to tell us, though, thank you.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
I think, so one of the things I'm thinking about it as we're talking about this and hearing concerns from the first part of the morning, and thinking about how do we, it's all about expectations. And not just the kids' expectations, but our expectations and their expectations of us. And how if the kids don't, if they've never been to camp, they don't know what a camp experience is about, then they show up at a school with adults that are telling them what to do, and therefore they're going to default to their expectation, which is what they do at school, which may be to rebel, to mouth off, to push back, to not have that respect that the volunteers and all of us that are here, whether we're Rotarians or not, that's not our expectation. And so what I wonder is there a way that we can, in that opening day, because I think that opening day is a pretty powerful opportunity, to think about how do we recraft this and really say, look, you're not at school. Like, we're going to do some school stuff, and there are some teachers here, but there's a lot of people here who are community members. And the idea of how do we really look at the role of the volunteers is to be that caring community member. And so from a programmatic side, like thinking about, like we do our team building thing in the morning but I wonder if even we do breakout groups and we might even be able to get the BU students to facilitate like what are these behaviors and it's not us as adults leading the conversation, but that we're part of it because it's the idea that at camp we're all part of that community. Yep. And it's reframing that idea. But I think, and then in the background, I think also kind of setting some guidelines that we as volunteers know, like here's the point at which if a kid is giving you this kind of disrespect or this kind of thing, this is just a refer it to a teacher, or we designate some folks that go through that mental health training, the first aid. Because I think about like if a kid twisted their ankle, we're not going to treat it. We're going to call the nurse. So who's the behavioral nurse, if you will, right? And who are those folks that we can utilize so that as volunteers, we know, okay, here's the limit of where we need to deal with it. And it might be that part of what our job as a caring adult is to be the one that kind of follows up and be like, hey, saw you had a rough morning, how you doing? You know, and it could be going back to that first day talking about what camp could be all about. And I just feel like in thinking about one of the challenges that of what folks are saying is how do we diagnose? Well, it's not our role to diagnose. Nope. Well, what do we do in this situation? Well, we're not going to be trained enough to have the answers to all that. Right. And so what are the boundaries and expectations of when we defer it out? What is it that we see that we should recognize is going on? You know, the kid's not a bad kid. The kid just hasn't eaten. Or the kid's has like 2 of these essential things going on in their lives, you know, and we might be the third, right? And so how do I don't know that I have a clear answer, but I feel like there's something around that, how we set expectations and define the roles that we as volunteers have, knowing that there's the limits to the behaviors.
Go there for 1 second. You said something, I want to explode it. We don't know their expectations.
Correct.
Right, exactly.
Well,
We don't
no.
ask them.
That's where, in schools, even now, if we expect healthy participation in
Yeah.
groups, what do you think this looks like?
Yeah.
And you have a collaborative approach with
Yeah.
the kids. That's statistics. They'll buy in.
Yeah.
And you can, because I was just talking to Sam about this, not that it's a manipulation game at all, but you have in mind what the outcome is.
Yeah.
And so you can just kind of talk to them about, so what do you think you're getting at with this?
Yeah.
And then, if there's disrespectful talk, you know, and you feel comfortable intervening, you just, I'm not sure what the point was, but you could just point to that poster that they made.
Yeah.
So part of that culture building on that day, or even the first week, you gotta create that climate.
Yeah.
It's all about expectations for lunch. I mean, not many, because there's a lot of different, like general activities expectations, general group expectation, general lunch expectations, that you're all on board with. So there's common language.
And I love that you use the word the culture building and thinking about the the way that we craft, if you and I have a great, if I'm a student, and you and I have a great conversation on that first day, or it's something that we kind of connect, and then on day 4, I mouth off to Rick and I get in trouble, you're someone I can safely go to and just talk to, right? And to get that kind of situation as opposed to that we're all kind of having to be disciplinarians, and that it's not a good cop, bad cop thing, but it's about trust building and relationship building and the community culture that we want to get us to that side of the room,
Right.
as opposed to what we saw so much of on this side of the room this year.
Yes.
What we're talking about is what's used in a lot of schools called a responsive classroom.
Correct.
And again, Google it, and you can get a brief description. It will give you a framework for what a responsive classroom is doing.
It's also a piece of the restorative justice,
Right.
Yep.
where we don't ask as much as we want to. We don't ask, why'd you do it? They don't know. They won't,
Right.
half the time they won't know, so it's the, okay, what was in your mind before you did that? And it's a lengthy process, because when they get to my point, it gets to be kind of big, but there's a lot of stuff that is here that you can kind of say, 2 words, I noticed this, you were having trouble with this, what's up today? Or, you know,
And it's, you know, you can categorize their problems as ant problems, dog problems, elephant problems. Ant problems, they can deal with it themselves. The dog problems, you might need some support. Elephant problems, we might need to bring a few more people together.
We rely on teachers from the school district.
Yep.
And we're concerned particularly about people who have, or students, children who have more severe reactions. Let's say. Would it make sense for us to have a special educator involved who could help?
I think
Who has-
historically, there has been a special educator involved. Yeah.
Amy's been there, but she's been more involved in ELA than actually.
I don't know,
And related to that, would it make sense to do some work, a day or 2 of preparation with the teachers that we
I think that's
contract
really
before
wise.
the camp starts?
I really, really do.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Well, and is there any orientation for volunteers?
No.
And you may even wanna think about, do you wanna be called volunteers, do you wanna have best camp, buddy, I don't know, whatever, we need it to be middle school cool, but sometimes, and I'll give this example from my classroom, again, I was the teacher, so I could get my students to follow the rules. Well, I had several paraprofessionals who helped me, because I was only one person. And I'd hear the kids say, you're just an aide. I don't have to listen to you, you're just an aide. And I would come right over and I would say, excuse me, every adult in this room is to be treated along these guidelines. And so at the beginning of my year after that, we did distinguish who was what. Any adult, these are the expected behaviors. Again, they need that pointed out. So they may come in and say, well, there's a teacher, I know her, but you're just a volunteer, why should I listen to you? Now, I think another great thing, maybe in some of the writing or some of the project-based things, or maybe career interests, talk about some of what you guys have done in your careers. You know, bring in some of who you are as a person into some of, you know, the activities.
They do interview us, that's been their pattern.
I love that.
That's one of the things that they do, is there is a morning, or at least part of a time, devoted to interviewing. And so we talk to the kids, and they find somebody like Bill Driscoll here that they love right away, and, you know, it really makes a big difference. Yeah,
You give them candy.
Let the kids do.
You give some candy, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, I see you got next steps up on the board, and
Yep.
I've sort of been itching to say this for some time.
Oh, my God.
Please.
I
Please don't.
think that we have to take expectations to a higher level, which is our own organization and structure. You use 2 or 3 different terms like sharing and team and investment, and we've got some problems along those lines related to relationships with the school, with the teachers, with the volunteers. We haven't put that together. When we had all the negatives at the end of last camp, I went to Tanya and I said, we've got to have a better team approach to this, and today is one of the results of that. I'm simply stating what is obvious. I think that we've got to come together in some ways that give the volunteers more confidence, that there's a structure there, that they are not behavior modification people. Maybe just stability, but what other resources are available? How do we work together?
Yep,
So some of this is organization.
right, I agree with that. And I think too, I mean, think of how if you go into a situation and you're not exactly hearing what's expected of you as a person working at the camp, maybe, you know, you have your own, kind of like we did here.
That's
As far as,
exactly
you know, how do we support the teachers? How do the teachers support us? How do we communicate? What do we do if we come across something, you know, medical, it's this person we go to. We've got this empty spot for who we go to around other things. Maybe we need to recruit somebody in or have a volunteer with that expertise, or have some connection with either school or mental health, and there are, you know, maybe some local resources that are willing to help out. But it's very hard to walk in every day and not know what you're going to encounter. And it's hard for the kids to do the same, because that's maybe how they're feeling walking in, and I think you take care of a lot of that by having those initial meetings and by doing some of those next steps.
Recall today, this young lady next to me is Lily McCarthy.
Excuse me.
And I watched Lily, I first met her a couple of years ago when she came to Quest. I watched her grow up at Quest the last couple of years. Well, I had a nice conversation with Lily during the first break, and Lily, I'd like you to share your perspectives. You've been a Best Quest camper for a couple of years. What have you taken away from it? How's it different from you?
Well, I mean, knowing that I have many people to support me and having them behind me the whole time, knowing that I could have somebody to talk to. The educational part kind of helped me with grades, bringing them back up. I kind of just appreciated everybody's work that they put into it all.
Lily, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Day one, first day of Camp Quest or Best, whichever it was, you walked in, you got off a bus, or your parents brought you, and there were 80 kids, and we were passing out backpacks, and everybody's running around like chickens with their head cut off. What did you think that day? What did you think it was gonna be like?
I thought it was going to be an anxiety attack waiting to happen, to be completely honest.
So you were uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You were uncomfortable.
An anxiety attack waiting to happen.
Oh my God.
How could we have made you comfortable? What could we have done that would have made you say, this is okay?
I'm not totally sure. I mean, I don't think I kind of prepared myself to be around a million kids, that I didn't know how they were going to react to everything and how they were going to expose themselves on who they really were. So I didn't prepare myself enough for it. So I mean, that part's kind of on me.
Yeah.
Were you going into sixth grade at that point?
Yeah,
So were you from Range or Jaffrey?
I was from Range.
So that was your first meeting with more?
Jeffrey
Yeah.
kids, yeah.
Oh, boy.
That was my
Okay,
reaction.
so the last day of camp, that same year, the last day when you were doing the Quest Olympics, what did you think that day? Can you remember?
I kind of didn't want the camp to end. I met a lot of new friends. I met great role models for me. So it was kind of hard to say that it was ending, but I knew I was probably going to come back.
And what do you think the rest of the kids? Do you think that was a common theme, or do you think you were an exception?
I mean, maybe some kids had that same reaction with first getting there and then ending, but some kids just don't really get the point that they're being chosen to do this. Like, they have people volunteering just for them. I don't get that.
Lily, how did it affect your following school year?
My grades actually kind of stayed pretty steady, honestly. I didn't have any C's. That was pretty good. I had a B minus. That was my lowest grade that year.
My high school,
But then-
that's not high school.
But then future years,
What?
then your future years.
My future years, I mean, for foreign languages it's different, but I mean for academics, English and math, I've gotten pretty far. My English grade has stayed a B+ all year. Last year it was pretty good too, and that's become my favorite subject.
Excellent. Lily, you came back last year, even though you had moved, you came back to Best to be in LIT, right?
Yeah.
So, how did that experience, were you, excited about that experience after having 3 years of camp?
I was extremely excited, but I mean, some other kids weren't too happy because again, I didn't live in the Jeffrey Ringe area, so they said I wasn't supposed to be there. But again, for the years that I've actually put into the camp, we were like asked to come back.
What grade are you in now? Experience, the LIT.
Yeah,
What grade are you in now?
I'm in 9th grade,
Where?
At Conant?
Conval.
Convent, okay.
Are you coming back this year in some capacity?
Yeah.
Good.
Awesome. So we have to wrap up because we're coming to the end of our time.
Oh, no.
Now, I know a lot of you probably don't have pens and pencils, but it's something to think about. I just put a little thing that looks like this in your folders called a takeaway. And a lot of times when I work with teachers, I don't want them just leaving. I want to know that when they walk out, they've learned something they didn't know before, or they're thinking about it. So if you have a pen and you want to jot something down, it's just for you. It's not for anyone else, or you could share it. But that's to me like your commitment to doing something a little different after this than you did before you came in. So focus it on whatever you want to. It's just a kind of an agreement between yourself and you. And bring it to whatever your next gathering is to discuss things further. Kelly and or I or others from our office are happy to come back. We can bring trainings to you, we can certainly chat some more about that. Or, you know, if you wanna get something together toward, you know, closer to the beginning of camp, we can certainly try to come in and strategize. I think there are a lot of questions that have come up. And I think that there are people who maybe oversee Best Camp that have to kind of do some brainstorming too. But if there's anything we can do to support you going further, and just to sum up some of your next steps that I think we've all come up with is making sure there's some kind of way to have an orientation for those of you who are volunteering. Making sure you're building in a planning day with teachers and other adults who are coordinating together. Maybe at this, you know, if you do this sooner than later, you find out who's not at the table who we need here. Somebody, you know, we may need someone. We may want to get input from students who were in Best Camp and get some of their feedback. So think about that. Looking at what your day one schedule will be like and building some kind of a covenant or agreement, setting expectations and making sure that we're all part of Best Camp. How do we make it the best camp? And then maybe exploring. We know when somebody, you know, falls and hurts their wrist, we need to refer them to a medical professional. Is there someone we can identify in the community or who works with schools or someone who we know some next steps around this? And again, if there's more guidance or information, your schools have an awful lot of information about community-based resources. Maybe you do a day where someone mentioned a special educator. Maybe you do something like this and invite someone from the school district to come in and talk about different kinds of strategies to use with children, say, who have attention issues. You don't have to identify anybody, but maybe you do a little more of that. But maybe you as a group identify what else do you need to go forward from here. And do you have anything else?
No, thank you for having us. I know, you know, we've kind of meandered a little bit. Hopefully you took something out of this morning's presentation. And I want to commend you. Even on your bad and your worst days, you are making a difference.
Absolutely.
With the kids.
Never forget it.
Thank you, thank you.
And I will say, head and shoulders above most Rotary.
Please come back, if you're gonna save any of that material as a review, because we're kind of done, we're forgetful.
I'm not taking it.
What do you mean we?
Dr. Nevian?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, tell her Dr. Pierce
Folks,
was here and said hi.
folks, one quick
I used to be the
announcement.
chief operating officer.
Oh, yes.